and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Thursday, March 20th, 2025. Patients scramble as cheaper obesity drug alternatives disappear. Compound alternatives to Zepbound are on the way out. When Christina and Jackson Agar used to get pizza, they'd polish it off the same night. Things are different now that they're both taking an obesity drug. We recently ordered a pizza, and we ate some of it the first night, and then the next day, we had maybe a little bit more, says Christina. And then we ended up throwing the pizza away because it had gone past the days that you could eat it. And it was so strange because we had never done that. No, never, her husband Jackson says. They've each lost 20 pounds in about 6 weeks. But the Agars, who live in Minnesota, aren't taking Eli Lilly Zepbound. Their insurance doesn't cover it. They're taking a cheaper alternative that contains the active ingredient called tirzepatide. It's made from compounding pharmacy. By which is a special kind of pharmacy that's allowed to essentially make copies of drugs during shortages. Since starting on the compound tirzepatide, Christina says she has more energy for their 4 kids. And Jackson doesn't need his sleep apnea machine anymore. In December, the Food and Drug Administration approved Zepbound to treat sleep apnea. It's completely life-changing to take a bite of these triggering foods and just be like, enjoy it. Say, yep, that was good, and now I'm full, he says. But the compounded drugs that Agars and others have come to rely on aren't here to stay. The FDA says compounding pharmacies have to stop making tirzepatide because the agency has declared the year-long Zepbound shortage over. The deadline is Wednesday. How patients are feeling. The Agars are worried. Other patients are sad. Some are just angry. In Arizona, Margaret Carmichael was in denial. I thought what I think a lot of people perhaps did. Oh, it'll be fine. These compounding and telehealth places are making millions off of this and helping so many people. There's no way this is going to stop being available, she says. It has been confusing for patients. Some telehealth companies have been telling them that they won't be affected. Others have been offering last-minute sales as the FDA deadline nears. So March 19th, we are essentially done, says Josh Fritzler, the Chief Financial Officer of Olympia Pharmaceuticals. which has a large compounding pharmacy in Orlando, Florida, called an outsourcing facility. Production will stop, but pharmacies can still dispense Olympia's tirzepatide until it runs out or expires. Olympia has made the medicine for more than 100,000 patients a month, Fritzler says. They're nervous, they're scared, he says, and we're just hopeful that we can make enough in the time being to help fill patients' scripts. 7 large facilities, including Olympia's, are making tirzepatide. According to the FDA's latest outsourcing facility, product report, they are required to follow the same safety and quality standards as brand and generic drug makers are and inspected by the FDA. Smaller compounding pharmacies, which are regulated by states, were supposed to stop in February. Consumers get creative. Many patients told NPR they have been stocking up on compounded tirzepatide. Carmichael doesn't have health insurance right now. She says she can afford only a small stockpile. I don't have the money, she says, so I'm going to borrow the money and try to get 3 months and stretch it out as long as I can, and hope that 6 to 9 months from now there will be another solution. Eli Lilly sells Zepbound vials at a discount for people not using insurance, but Carmichael says they're too expensive. She would have to pay $500 or $600 for a month's supply of her dose from Eli Lilly. For around the same price, she has been able to get 3 months' worth from a compounding pharmacy. The standard forms of Zepbound, which come in an auto-injector pen, can cost more than $1,000 per month without insurance. Carmichael and other patients NPR spoke with say they buy large vials and then stretch out the medicine out over an extended period until the vials expire to save money. But the Eli Lilly vials don't contain a preservative and are labeled for single use, which the patients say complicates their cost-saving strategy. Also, to keep the company's discount, patients like Carmichael would have to renew their orders every 45 days. They're making it as difficult as possible for people, she says. The drug maker didn't immediately respond to a request for comment, but in a February interview with NPR, Eli Lilly, CEO of David Ricks, said offering a discount for patients taking the higher doses who reorder every 45 days is an opportunity for us to reward people who go with the program and stay on the medication. Some people are talking online about buying the active ingredient from China. and mixing the obesity drugs in their homes. They call it the gray market. Zepbound and the compounded alternatives have to be sterile for injection, so a homemade version would be challenging to make safely. Jackson Agar in Minnesota says the gray market is a risk his family is unwilling to take. Look, when you ban stuff, people are going to turn crazy alternatives because we need this and we don't have that much money. 5 years since the pandemic started, long COVID patients are still hoping for a cure. Long COVID patients haven't stopped pushing for more research funding to find treatments for their condition, including this protest in Washington, D.C. in 2022, which was held in tandem with patients suffering from myalgic fatigue syndrome. It's been 5 years since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, but many patients with long COVID have yet to find meaningful recovery. Around 6% of adults in the U.S., or roughly 18 million, are estimated to be living with damaging aftermath of catching the virus. According to research and a long-running survey of U.S. households. Although numbers are still difficult to pin down because the definitions vary. It's not a thing of the past. New patients are still showing up in doctors' offices. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, says Hannah Davis, co-founder of the advocacy group. I've seen so much long COVID in just last year or two. Research on long COVID has coalesced around a handful of explanations for what could underpin the illness. There are still no approved treatments for the condition, which can span many organ systems and symptoms, and depending on the patient, can include shortness of breath, brain fog, fatigue, and most extranasal malaise, among other things. Under the Biden administration, the long COVID patients had pushed for more federal funding and a refocus of research priority towards treatments. Now, patient advocates and scientists have to make their case to new decision makers, guided by the priorities of the Trump administration, and do so at a moment of turbulence for biomedical sciences, with funding imperiled for many institutions. Regardless of party or political position, Long COVID patients have been failed to date by our leaders, says Megan Stone. Executive Director of the Long COVID campaign, who's busy lobbying the new administration and Congress. Stone acknowledges there are certainly some heartfelt disagreements between the patient community and Trump's picks to lead federal health agencies, particularly on policies related to curbing the spread of the virus. She argues patients need to find places where there's common ground. We don't have the luxury of sitting out the next 4 years over any ideological differences. Slow progress in research, but promising new trials. For many patients, the day-to-day reality has not changed dramatically. Finding clinicians who are well-versed in the nuances of long COVID remains challenging, patients say. The approach to care generally focuses on relieving specific symptoms and related medical conditions that someone develops, such as autoimmunity or POTS, says Dr. Monica Verduzco Gutierrez, a chair of rehabilitation medicine at the UT Health Science Center, San Antonio. It's a lot of symptom management right now, she says. We need significant treatment trials. So patients have the possibility of getting a cure. Even though progress has not come nearly fast enough, those involved in long COVID research emphasize there's reason for optimism. In the last year alone, Davis notes scientists have published important work in a variety of areas on blood clotting, the impacts of exercise, evidence of viral persistence in the spinal cord, and loss of blood flow to the brain, to name just a few. With this research in mind, in hand, the field is now ripe for a broader push to test different therapies. When trials launched a couple years ago, there was hope that it would be easy and we would just hit a home run, says Dr. Michael Paluzzo, who runs a large research program on long COVID at the University of California, San Francisco. The first round of trials that have been reported out have shown this is going to be more complicated. Well, we all sort of expected that. By Peluso's estimation, there are currently in the neighborhood of 50 drug trials underway for long COVID. A considerable increase from a few years ago, when he counted only about a dozen. We have drugs that can target almost every single one of the different mechanisms that we think might be contributing to long COVID. But so far, we've launched way too few trials to thoroughly test them, says Peluso. To get there will require more participation from drug makers, which have largely stayed on the sidelines. Plus, researchers want to identify a biomarker for the illness can be reliably tracked across multiple trials. And they say a better coordinated clinical trial agenda is needed. Different theories on long COVID's cause. Viral persistence. The theory that an ongoing infection is hiding out in the body has featured prominently in some of the early trials, which have leveraged antivirals and monoclonal antibodies in hopes of extinguishing this ongoing infection. At least half a dozen of other mechanisms may also drive the illness. Though, among them, immune dysfunction, the reactivation of dormant viruses like herpes, dysregulation of clotting proteins, and trouble with the microbiome, all of these could be equally, if not more important, as viral persistence, and have received less attention in clinical trials up to this point, says Peluso. Davis is closely following a number of up-and-running trials, led by individual research groups and universities, which are testing immunomodulators, HIV drugs, rapamycin, intravenous immunoglobulin, enzymes called nattokinase and lumbopronase, and other therapies. Private funders have stepped up to back some of these efforts. For example, the nonprofit Polybio Research Foundation. Has raised millions of dollars to spearhead some of its trials. The federal government, however, remains pivotal in guiding the broader long COVID agenda, given its role in funding research and eventually greenlighting treatment. Through the Recover Initiative, Congress has already poured more than $1 billion into this work, and last year appropriated an additional $662 million to be spent in the coming years. About half of that money is supposed to support clinical trials led by the National Institute of Health. A new lobbying push from patients. Ensuring these studies and the funding for them continue is the #1 priority right now, says Stone of the Long COVID campaign. With upheaval across federal health agencies and science funding in doubt, it's hard to know what's in store for an emerging field of research like long COVID. It's going to take a different type of strategy than we have been doing for the last 4 years, says Davis. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Dr. J. Bott, the nominee to lead the NIH, both explicitly pledged to support the long COVID research during their Senate confirmation hearings. Stone says Kennedy's focus on chronic diseases, and specifically the president's Make America Healthy Again Commission, could be an opportunity for long COVID patients and those suffering from infection-associated chronic conditions. On the other hand, Kennedy has indicated he'd like to deprioritize research on infectious diseases and even petitioned to have federal regulators pull the COVID-19 vaccine off the market in 2021. Kennedy and Bott have already heavily criticized measures aimed at the mitigating COVID transmission, but many of the long COVID community are frustrated that the ongoing spread of the virus has been normalized and point out that reinfections still carry a risk for long COVID. After taking office, President Trump was quick to disband a long COVID advisory committee that took months to stand up. That came as a disappointment to Verduzco Gutierrez, who was a member, but says it doesn't stop any of the work that she and others on the committee will be doing, alongside advocacy groups. Stone managed to get a moment in the hallway with Bott, and after his confirmation hearing earlier this month, and says he reiterated to her that he's serious about long COVID. Patients should take Secretary Kennedy and take Dr. Bott at their word, and that the administration doesn't meet the patient community in that. Then we will keep calling for action, the same way that we did under President Biden, she says.